Greetings, Cap fans. Welcome to episode 213 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm Rick Verbanis. I'm your host, and I've got a co host. His name is Bob Lucius. He's the best one out there. Oh, Bob. So long, sad times. Go long, bad times. We are rid of you at last. Howdy, gay times. Cloudy gray times. You're now a thing of the past. Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. So let's sing a song of cheer again.
Happy days are here again.
There you go.
All right.
There you go, Bob. Why am I greeting you with a song from 1929?
Because it's cheery, Rick. It's cheerful. And who can't use a little extra cheer in their life?
Especially today. So
Yes.
I would say because yesterday was election day, and so if you actually, well, I say yesterday, but technically we do come out at 10 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday night, so it's still election night. And if you're getting this the next morning, it's still they're still counting the votes. There's no listen. It's 2 weeks before we're recording before election day when we're recording this. But I was a betting man. There's not going to be a clear cut winner right away, right? Like there's going to probably be some going back and forth. I'm the winner. No, you're the winner. We're going to recount this. We're going to sue for that. Whatever. And you know what? We don't need that. We are not here today to talk about that. So, but I also picked this song because a couple of reasons actually. If you recall in the last episode, Beast was greeting Captain America in the Avengers Mansion with a little hat, a little flag, and he was dancing and he was singing this song to Steve because Steve was um, being talked about running for president. Now, why did Beast pick this song? Because it did come out in 1929. It was a song by Milton Agar and lyrics by Jack Yellen. And it's a song that's been throughout the decades by various artists. It actually appeared in a film in 1930 called Chasing Rainbows. But here's the thing, Bob. It was the campaign song that FDR ran for his 1932 presidential campaign.
You don't say, Rick.
It's true, Bob.
Well, I know you wouldn't say it if it wasn't.
I say a lot of things.
I know that.
Yeah. So how you feeling today, Bob?
All right, man. All right. It's been a rough and ragged, election season, but it's nice that we're closing in on some results here. We can all get back to our normal lives.
Let's
So
hope,
I'm excited
right?
about that. I'm excited about that. So
I will say probably half the people today are feeling pretty good, the other half not feeling so good. So we thought, what better than to take you away from all of your concerns and worries and gnashing of teeth regarding the presidential election, than do a show about Cap meeting presidents.
yeah, of course, right? It makes perfect sense. And I think we've been talking about this for a while, and it seemed like a perfect time to to maybe do that show for folks who maybe want a little distraction and see how Cap has fared with other presidents throughout his 90-year history.
It's true. He's met a few.
Yeah,
He's met a few. Actually, he's also not met a few. And so we'll
it's
talk
true.
about that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it'll be a little interesting. Um, Bob, I want to talk about we actually end up finishing our fundraiser for those affected by the hurricanes and donating to the American Red Cross. I'd like to just applaud everybody who contributed to this. We raised nearly $1,300,
Hey,
and
that's pretty good.
yeah, so to the American Red Cross. So thank you to everybody who donated, and we do have. I promised whoever was the highest donor that I would send them a Captain America care package. It included a bunch of Captain America comics, including several number ones, uh, a What Would Cap Do challenge coin, and some stickers, as well as a Captain America Funko Pop. So I
Mhm.
am happy to announce that the highest bidder, or highest donor, I should say, is Michael Udlock.
Good job, Michael.
Yeah. Now, if that name's familiar to those listening, it's because he was the director for our community theater episode back in episode 200. And so he was the director as well as the narrator for that particular episode. So Michael, we want to thank you, and I will be getting that out in the mail to you before long. And all the other donors, I just want to say thank you very much. You guys really stepped up when it said, "What would Cap do?" And so, and for all those who also shared this on other avenues out there to get the word out, thank you for doing that as well.
Very, I'm proud of you for doing this, Rick. You stepped up and you did what Cap would do, and you led the way and encourage other folks to lead the way as well. So all in all, great job, everybody.
All right, Bob. You know what? I think we should get into today's topic. I know I'm excited to hear about all the times that Captain America had a chance to meet the U.S. president. I know you're excited about getting into it. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Rick. This is something that has been on my mind a lot, and because I may have mentioned this before. I mean, I collect. What the heck does that mean? I collect principally Captain America stuff, right? Always have. But one of the side sort of things that I like, and I don't spend a lot of time on it or a lot of money on it, but I do have a bunch of books. I like political comic books. So maybe comic books that have a like a politician on the cover, something like that. And there's stuff. They've been more prevalent lately over the last maybe 6 years or so. There's been a lot more comics out with Keen Spot and a couple other companies that really have turned this into a cottage industry. But prior to that, it was very few and far between that you would see, especially a cover with a politician. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. And so I got interested in, well, we know that Cap works for the president, right? I mean, that's how he got started. But like, how many times has he met the president, and not just met the president off panel, right? Or just implied, but actually in a Captain America comic. And which presidents has Cap actually interacted with? So this was something that I've been curious about, and I thought, well, let's dig in a little bit. So we're going to do sort of the 10 most recent presidents that have interacted with Cap. And that's it. That's just the 10 of them. So going all the way back to the beginning. So let's just start with the first one. If I asked you, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was our 32nd president, served from 1933 to 1945, Rick, when do you think is the first time, chronologically in the comics, not in Cap's life, but in the comics, the first time that he met Cap?
Oh boy. That's a good question. I'm not a huge Golden Age expert.
Mm-hmm.
But gosh, I don't know. It'd have to be in the first few issues of Captain America
Well,
comics,
that
right?
that's what you would think, right? And of course, FDR does show up in the first page of Captain America 1. That's when he's talking to his team, and they're talking about kicking off, the Operation Rebirth program. But we don't actually see FDR and Cap get together until issue 40 of Captain America comics. So that's a lot later. That's in July 1944. And we only see him in really two panels. And this is in a story called The Auction of Death. And Cap and Bucky are in the Oval Office talking to FDR. And there's been a big secret weapon that somebody has put up for auction. And they want to know if the United States is interested and Hitler's interested. It turns out it's a Nazi trick, as they always are. And FDR says, no, we're not interested in this weapon, but I want you and Bucky to go stop whoever is auctioning this weapon off. So that's the only time, by the way, in the entire Captain America comics run that FDR, any president for that matter, interacts with Cap. Now, that probably comes as a surprise to a lot of folks because when we think about FDR and Cap, what is the one event that sticks in people's mind?
Well, for me,
Yeah,
it's when he gives him his round shield,
that's it.
right? Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
Roger Stern, John Byrne era.
that's exactly right. And that's the first time that we really see that actually happen. That's in Captain America 255 from March 1981. That's when FDR hands him the saucer shaped shield to replace the heater shield. So that's never depicted in the Golden Age comics. FDR doesn't have that handover. Cap just shows up with a round shield, and there's no explanation for it. So we also see that same moment depicted from 255 in Captain America 344, and in another one that maybe a lot of folks aren't that familiar with, and that's the one in Sentinel of Liberty, Volume 1, Number 7 from March 1999. And what's really cool about that story, I don't know if you remember this, Rick, but what's cool about that story is FDR tells Cap in that moment that they were planning, if this super soldier serum had worked on Steve Rogers, they were going to give it to FDR.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right?
Yeah,
Because, he was paralyzed from polio.
right.
So, and with Erskine's death, of course, that went out the window. So that was kind of a neato bandito little thing, to show up in Sentinel Liberty. I don't know if that would have ever played out. I don't know who came up with that idea. I guess the writers, right? But we never heard anything about that ever again. But anyway, there's some other great scenes where FDR and Cap interact in Captain America Reborn #2 from October 2009. There's a great scene where Cap materializes into his body in the Oval Office, standing in front of FDR, and of course he's taken a little aback because he's flipping through time, and FDR says, "You okay, son?" Because he's a little shocked. There's a great scene, by the way, in Marvel's Project #8, where we see the entire Invaders team gathered in FDR's Oval Office right at the beginning of their alliance. So when they first came together and were getting ready to strike out on their early missions, we see that portrayed. And then in the Adventures of Captain America #4, we see FDR welcoming Cap home from one of his first missions. That's the mission that Cynthia Glass, died, his first love. And FDR basically embraces him and
Wait a
calls
minute. Wait,
him.
wait, wait, wait. Are
Yeah.
we really going to get into this first love with Cynthia Glass thing again? You threw that in there as
Oh,
kind of like you could have just said Cynthia Glass, but no, you had to say his first love
Steve Rogers'
because
own words. I don't know. I mean, that's what he said. I got to take him at his word, man.
okay.
So anyway, he welcomes Cap home and calls him America's favorite son. I'm not sure how Bucky took that, but in any case, it was a nice portrayal. And then there's a couple other really nice portrayals of FDR and Cap as well. In Captain America 423 from January 1994, we get a nice World War II story where FDR is pinning a medal on Cap, and Namor shows up. And by the way, this is before the whole Invaders thing and before Namor and Cap ever met. And Namor tries to kidnap FDR. So that's a pretty good little story, of course, written by Roy Thomas. And then in Giant
Now
Size,
hold on, I just want to point that out.
yeah,
This was during Mark Grunwald's 10-year run, but this is the one little blip, the one little issue in between that 10-year run by Mark Grunwald, written by Roy Thomas. Little, little side fact there.
a little side fact, yeah. And then in Giant Size Invaders #2 from December 2005, another one by Roy Thomas, by the way. And this is an underappreciated story. A lot of fun, though. We get to see Churchill and FDR driving around in FDR's car at Camp David. And we get to see the invaders, principally, again, Namor and Cap, trying to protect the two of them as they're goofing off, driving at high speeds around Camp David, having fun from a bunch of kidnappers. So great story. And then the last one I got to mention is Captain America and the Bahama Triangle from September 2019. Again, by Roy Thomas. He loves these World War II stories, and he loves including FDR in those stories with Cap. So great book, by the way, penciled and inked by Jerry Ordway. And it's a great story that has Human Torch, Namor again, before they ever became the invaders. And it's got, the original Baron Zemo as well. So, it's going to be a fun story. So
Wasn't
all
that
those
one of the
stories.
ones? Wasn't that one of the ones that you wanted to add to the bucket list?
Oh, I'm pushing you on that one, Rick.
All right,
Love that story.
maybe 2025.
Love it. Love it. Great, great story. Good art too. Art's fabulous. Story's wonderful.
I like Jerry Ordway.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. So there we have it. FDR and Cap have interacted quite a bit.
Yeah, but interesting enough, it's there wasn't as much in the golden age as you would think. It seems like most of the stories came way after, and a lot of these are retconned, and have some interesting little twists. I love the twist about if the super soldier serum worked, that it was going to be done on FDR. I love little twists like that.
Right, right. Where's that what if book, right? I can't believe they missed out on that one. But what's interesting? You make a good point though, right? About not as many appearances at all, much less with Cap in the Golden Age books, and that surprises me a little bit. And I don't know, maybe the sensibilities were different back then, where it was okay, to portray Hitler and Mussolini or Stalin or Hirohito, but maybe it just wasn't, considered okay to, portray the president, even if it was in a very, positive light. So I don't know, times have changed perhaps.
And then next president would be Harry S. Truman, right?
Right. The 33rd president served from 1945, took over with FDR's passing in his fourth term, and served to 1953. So do you know Harry Truman's middle name, Rick?
It's S. We all know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Just S. Plain
That's
old
it.
S.
His middle name is S. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
It's
it.
what?
That's his middle name, S. He does not have a middle name. He simply has an initial. And he actually explained that it was a compromise between the names of his two grandfathers. So Anderson Ship Truman and Solomon Young. And so he just went with S. S period later in his life. So there you have it.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So a little factoid for you. So here's the thing. Steve Rogers, at least I think we can generally say, I think this is true. Steve Rogers never met Harry Truman. That may not be true. We'll circle back around to this. At least not in the comics, right? But William Naslund certainly did. So when William Naslund was serving as Captain America.
Now, William Naslund, he used to be the Spirit of 76.
Spirit of 76, right? And in fact, we see Truman introduce Naslund, the former Spirit of 76, and the replacement Bucky, Fred Davis. And of course, this was after Steve got chucked into the ice, right? And Bucky got blown into the ocean, presumed dead, both of them. And so Naslund and Fred Davis are brought in and presented to the rest of the invaders in What If number 4, cover date of August 1977, which we covered, of course, in one of our podcasts.
Episode 124.
That's right. So this meeting, of course, is retold again in Captain America 215 from November 1977, as well as in the saga of the original Human Torch number 3 from June 1990. Of course, both of them written by Roy Thomas. So it was also, by the way, briefly depicted in Captain America Volume 6, number 19, as well as in the Captain America and Bucky miniseries. Do you remember that? The legacy number went from like 625. I think it was about 8 or 9 issues.
Yeah, it's interesting you called it a miniseries because I always thought that is as the series. I never thought of it as a miniseries because the numbering kept continuing.
Right.
And so I don't know. I still think of it as the ongoing series. It's like saying when they changed it to Captain America and the Falcon, did that mean it was no longer the Captain America series? No. So I don't know. To me, Captain America and Bucky is still the same series.
Yeah, it's okay. Fair enough. You're right. It like the Captain America and the Falcon, it had a completely different title because it added Bucky to the title. But they also had those one shots, the single issue ones with Hawkeye and I think Black Widow and the first 13 and the Falcon one as well. But in any case, the Captain America and Bucky series, those I think 7 or 8 maybe books, maybe 9, written by Ed Brubaker and James Asmuth with art by Francesco Francavilla. Oh yeah, 9 issues detailed Bucky Barnes's backstory. But it also covered Fred Davis's backstory and how he met William Naslund, and eventually went to work with Jeff Mace. So we do get to see William Naslund actually interact quite a bit with President Truman in one of the stories in the Namor the Submariner Annual #1, a story called the Potsdam Objective. And that's a pretty good story, Rick. It takes place after World War II at the Potsdam Peace Conference in 1941. And Naslund is there as Captain America escorting President Truman. And we got the Red Guardian there as the escort of Joseph Stalin. So, really fun story. Encourage folks to check that out. Here's the thing, though. We also see Steve Rogers. Remember, I said, oh, I don't think Steve Rogers ever interacted with Truman, but I have to go back and look at volume 2. You remember volume 2, Rick?
I do.
Yeah. So, volume 2, number 3, written by Jeff Loeb and penciled by Rob Liefeld, we see a turn of events that was kind of hinted at in volume 4, that story Ice by Chuck Austin. And that's where Steve Rogers is in Truman's office on the verge of World War II ending, and they're thinking about dropping the bomb on Japan, or the bombs, as the case may be. And Steve objects. And what do?
They freeze him.
They freeze him. They put him on ice, right? So that whole story about him getting chucked off, the drone and falling into the North Atlantic and getting frozen was a cover story for the fact that they felt like he was unreliable, had to put him on ice till a future date. So when
Now
I
that
say,
is that story, I don't know. Is that canon? Is that one of those what if type stories?
I have no idea, Rick. I know in as I said in volume 4 in that story Ice, he comes across some newsreels that seem to suggest that this in fact happened. But I don't think anybody has ever pulled that thread any further after the volume 4 story. So who knows? Maybe somebody will treat on it again at some later point. But so far, nobody has had the courage to dig any deeper on that story.
After Truman, we
After
get Ike.
we get Ike, right? Yeah, that's right. Dwight David Eisenhower, our 34th president, who served from 1951 to 1961. So now this surprises me, right? Because we know that Ike served as the Supreme Allied Commander during the war, and then he was president. But he's only ever been featured in one Captain America story that I can find, and that's the Captain America Theater of War America First one shot that came out in February 2009. So this one, written, penciled, and inked by Howard Chaykin, colored by Edward Delgado, and it's one of the 7 Theater of War one shots. So it's a great story, but it's not Steve Rogers, right? We know this is William Burnside, and it's a fun little story. It's got Black Widow, it's got Nick Fury. I think this is a great story. I'm a big William Burnside fan. I'll take what I can get with William Burnside. So I encourage folks to pick up that story and read it if you haven't. But at the end of that story,
or check out episode 172 where we cover the Theater of War one shots.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a great scene at the end of that story, and I don't want to give away what happens in the story, but Burnside as Captain America is in the Oval Office with Dwight Eisenhower, and Eisenhower, I think it appears that he's maybe pinning a medal on him. We can't really tell because his back is to Cap, and Fury's there, and Eisenhower's going on and on and on about how he can't get over the fact that Cap doesn't seem to have aged since he saw him on D-Day. And Fury's just kind of whispering into Burnside's ear, basically just go with it, mm-hmm. Right? Don't let on, because he doesn't need to know the truth of this. So, but that's it. That's the only time we ever, and that I find that crazy. We have the Reborn series, we got lots of World War II stories, but Cap never, to my knowledge, ever interacted with General Eisenhower.
Interesting. Yeah, but the whole thing about William Burnside, he, that was, the commie smasher, right? I mean, like during
Mm-hmm.
that whole McCarthy era, type of thing, I wonder how Steve would have handled all that. Like, seeing, I mean, he would have been an Ike man, right? He would have, I think, been a fan of the man and the general and perhaps the president. But I don't know. Yeah, it's a fascinating time, of our country, and and it's interesting that Steve Rogers is like nowhere around for it. I would love a what if story of what Steve would do in that time period.
Yeah, it's crazy. It almost hurts your brain, doesn't it, Rick? And we talked about this because we did do a podcast about the 1950s cap, and we had this discussion because when those comics were written, they were Steve Rogers. Like the writers were writing for Steve Rogers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right. And it's only because of the retcon that oh yeah, it's William Burnside, right? How would Steve Rogers have handled that? So, we're of course thinking like, how would our Steve Rogers
yeah.
handle that? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
The Steve Rogers we know and love,
right.
not that commie hating guy.
Not the commie hating guys. So yeah, it does hurt your brain a little bit. But it would be fun to explore in a what if story, most definitely. And throw in a little Isaiah Bradley while you're at it, and a very early Winter Soldier that Cap didn't know was Bucky. That might be fun too.
All right. Now coming after Ike, we have none other than JFK.
All right, JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th president of the United States from 1961 until he was sadly assassinated 3 years into his presidency in 1963. And we never really get to see JFK presented in a cap story. Of course, why? Well, because Burnside is in cryostasis. Mace is retired as a reporter in Glenview, and Steve Rogers is on ice, and Naslin's dead. So there is no cap in the 1960s. So we can't expect to have a JFK story with Cap, but we do get to see JFK interact with Cap way back in What If #4, and by the way, also a part of it covered in issue 3 of the saga of the original Human Torch. And if you remember from What If #4, Rick, we've got this plot by Adam 2, the android who is trying to assassinate the real JFK and replace him. And at this time, Kennedy is like a first-term congressman from the 11th district in Massachusetts. So he's just starting on his rise. Now Naslin doesn't get to interact with JFK because he is killed by Adam 2 before he gets a chance to see the real JFK. But Jeff Mace then goes to the invader's ship, puts on his uniform, goes out as Cap, and saves the day, protecting JFK from Adam 2's onslaught. So he may not have been president, but I'm going to count it as an encounter with a presidential figure because it was early in his career, and we know that he's going to go on to do great things.
Yep, I will accept that. And also, we did cover that issue, that story, panel by panel. So if you want to check that one out with JFK in it, that is episode 124.
All right, great. That was a great podcast. So definitely check it out.
All right, now I can't wait for this next one because the next president is LBJ.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I can't remember when Cap met him, so I'm excited to hear when it happened.
Yeah, never.
What?
Never, Rick. Yeah, Lyndon Baines Johnson, our 36th president, picked up the mantle in 1963 and served through 1969 until he decided that he was not going to seek another term. Vietnam War going on. Yep, never interacted with Captain America. Of course, there wasn't one. So again, he stuck, right? And then, of course, Vietnam War's on. Cap didn't play a big role in the Vietnam War. So here we go. We got nothing with LBJ. Big surprise.
Okay. How about the next president? That would be Nixon.
All right, Nixon. All right.
I know we got something there.
We do have a couple gems. So we get to see, I completely forgot about this, Rick, until I started doing a little research, because I think you're probably more familiar with his second appearance. But the first time that we see him interact with Cap is in Captain America 144 from December 1971. And we see Cap and Sharon and Nick Fury concluding a demonstration of LMDs and the Fem Force fighting a fake Hydra, opponents in a combat demonstration. And when they finish, they get on, an early version of a video teleconference hookup. And on the other end, we get to see President Nixon and his generals in the White House. And Fury's trying to get some money out of Nixon to beef up his LMD research and to outfit the Fem Force, and he doesn't get much love from Nixon. Nixon's just like, yeah, okay, it was impressive, but just send us the plans for the LMDs and we'll get back to you. And Nick's not having any of that. So just a tiny appearance, but I had completely forgotten that appearance in a Captain America comic. But the one I think most people remember, Rick, is that controversial final panels at the end of the first Secret Empire
All
story.
right, all right, all right. Hold on now.
All right.
I'm going to stop you here because I don't know if you know this, Bob. We're doing this little long tail story of the Secret
Mm,
Empire,
mm.
and
All right.
we're actually going to cover
Yeah, you're right.
next episode. We're going to do part 4, which
All
is
right.
issue 173.
Yeah.
So let's not jump ahead to
All right.
175
I'll
right
spin
now.
this. I'll
Okay.
leave it vague. How's that?
Uh-huh.
All right. So as you know, that first Secret Empire arc is a great story. We're covering it in our long what do we call it?
Long tail.
Long tail. I love that long tail. So we're covering on a long tail. We're not going to get to the end of that series soon, but we do get to see maybe an appearance of Nixon at the end of that story. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Folks are going to have to
Oh,
tune in if they haven't read it, or they're going to have to jump ahead and read it. But I hope you'll tune in when we cover those remaining issues in upcoming podcasts, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But he does make an appearance.
I'm going to bet, I'm a betting man, Bob, that Nixon, being the president of the United States, he is going to come in and swoop in and save the day.
Yeah, I think that's probably a wise choice.
Right.
I think everything we know sort of points to that.
Right. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
we only have great, trustworthy, honest individuals as presidents, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Exactamundo. All right.
All right. Now, after, all right, let's get into. I've been waiting for this one because I could not find anything in my research, Bob. Gerald Ford.
Oh, Gerald Ford, right? Yes, Gerald Rudolph Ford Jr. I mean, how can you not like a president whose middle name is Rudolph? It's my favorite reindeer, right?
Exactly.
So, 38th president. Interestingly enough, the only president to, I guess, the only president never to be elected, right? Right, because he became vice president when Spiro Agnew had to resign in disgrace, and then when Nixon resigned, he became president. Before that, he had been Speaker of the House. So he just sort of swooped in and chose not to run for reelection in 1977 when he ended his term. So guess what, Rick? I don't want to break your heart, but like his successor, James Earl Carter Jr., who served as the 39th president, neither one of them appeared in a Captain America comic.
Okay, so you're telling me not only is President Ford a no, but you're now telling me Jimmy Carter too?
I am telling you that. I am telling you they never appeared in a Captain America comic. But
Yikes. All right.
what do I like, Rick?
You like a
Loopholes.
redemption arc.
I like a redemption arc and pair it with a loophole, and I am a happy camper. So I said they've never appeared in a Captain America comic, but they have appeared with Cap on the cover of What If 26, which has a cover date of April 1981. Do you remember that one, Rick?
Yeah, yeah, that's where Cap's being sworn in as a president.
That's right. And behind him on the dais, we see not just Gerald Ford, but Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, but Bob Hope, and I think Charles Bronson is on there, or maybe it's not Charles Bronson. It must be Burt Reynolds. I don't know, but a bunch of celebrities and personalities. So, but that's the only place that I have found that we get to see Cap standing in the same vicinity with President Ford and President Carter.
Okay. Moving on to the next president. So basically there was a 7 or 8 year period there where Cap was not in a story with a current U.S. president. But I know our next president, which happened came in 1981, Ronald Reagan. I know personally.
Yeah, of
Cap
course you do.
Cap met him.
Yeah, yeah. Ronald Wilson Reagan, the 40th president, served from 1981, 2 terms through 1989. And he does make a couple appearances in Captain America comics. I know you're very familiar with his appearance in the story, The Deadliest Snake of All, in Captain America 344, which came out in August 1988. Remember that story, Rick?
I do. I knew it
Yeah.
very well because I was, really, really into comics at that time. I mean, I was collecting comics before that, but I just really got into that story because there was something about Kieran Dwyer's art that really kind of reinvigorated me on the
Mm-hmm.
Cap series, and Viper's always been a kind of a cool, sexy kind of villain,
Oh,
and but
yeah.
I never saw her this crazy before, and then her turning U.S. citizens into these reptilian snake-like uh, um, creatures, including Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Cap goes as the captain goes into the White House to try to stop this because there was a poison in the water, right?
Right.
Turns out it was too late,
Yeah.
and Ronald Reagan, as a gigantic snake creature, reptile creature, fights Steve Rogers as the captain. I did actually own a page for quite some time of
Mm-hmm. I
of
remember
them
that.
two battling in the White House, and the Secret Service come with their machine guns and everything, because they didn't know that Ronald Reagan was a snake. But I think this was Mark, and you know what we had on the show, Catherine Schuler Grunwald, who was Mark Grunwald's wife, and she talked a little bit about this as Mark wrote the story because he wasn't a fan of Reagan, and kind of thought of him as a snake, and actually wrote him into the story as that.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, I know there at least. Yeah, Steve met Reagan. Wasn't
Yeah.
underneath the best of circumstances.
No, no, it certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't. And I think if I recall, it's kind of a cool series of panels because I think right before he goes into Reagan's quarters or Oval Office or something, he is remembering being there with FDR, and then he goes in and like Reagan's a reptile creature. So pretty, it's a cool story, fun story. Who doesn't like a good Viper story? So he does show up. Reagan does show up in one other story that I am familiar with, and that is What If Volume 2, Number 3, in a story called What If Steve Rogers Had Refused to Give Up Being Captain America. And it takes sort of an alternate look at that whole commission debacle and the Super Patriot picking up the shield in the mantle of Captain America. And there's a scuffle between John Walker and Cap out on the National Mall. And Reagan shows up and basically breaks up the fight and says, "Okay, boys, just get along." And so he does have that brief appearance in that story as well.
Bob, you undersell your skills. That voice you just did,
Uh-huh.
hey boys, like that was pretty good.
I
You
was
sh-
doing John Walker.
yeah, you oh, I missed that part.
All right. So
Next
moving on.
president. Next
All right.
president. Yeah, Reagan had a vice president who ended up becoming the next president. That would be George H. Bush. Uh, did he meet Captain
He
America?
sure did. And the great thing about George Bush the first, the 41st president, served from 1989 to 1993, just one term, is he is the only US president to have four names. Truman
Okay.
didn't even have a middle name, but I don't know if he's the only one. But George Herbert Walker Bush, George H.W. Bush, right? So how that's he comes. What do they call that? The American aristocracy. You can afford to have two middle names, and
Right,
that's good
right.
stuff. Good stuff. And anyway, we do see the elder Bush president appear in one Cap store, one Cap interaction that from. It's not in a Cap book, but it is in the Avengers. And so in Avengers 319, which came out in July 1990, we see Cap along with Vision and Quasar and Cersei meeting with President Bush. Again, they're at the Avengers Mansion. Bush is at the White House, but they're using this VTC hookup. And it appears that a British submarine has gone missing. And Margaret Thatcher has asked the president to get the Avengers involved. And they go looking for it. Turns out it's been hijacked by a Soviet terrorist group called, I love this, the Peace Corps.
Very nice.
And in the process of trying to find this terrorist group and this sub, they run into the People's Protectorate, the Red Guardian, Vostok, Crimson Dynamo, a couple other characters from the Soviet Union. It's a pretty good story. And we see George Herbert Walker Bush just very briefly, but he sets them on this mission. So that's kind of neat. When the president calls, you kind of got to take the mission.
Is that it for
That's
Bush?
it. That's all.
Okay.
One term. He only got one appearance.
All right, fair enough.
Rules.
All right. How about our the next president? Now, this next president had 2 terms, and that would be Bill Clinton.
Yes, Bill Clinton. So definitely had 2 terms. Our 42nd president, William Jefferson Clinton, and he made a few appearances in that first run of Wade and Garney in Captain America. So in particular, in issue 445, we actually see President Clinton as one of the pallbearers carrying Captain America's casket to his final resting place at Arlington National Cemetery.
And
Yes.
by the way, we do cover that story. That was Operation Rebirth.
Yes.
Awesome story.
Awesome story.
Awesome story by Mark Waid and Ron Garney. So we cover that way, way, way back, Bob, episode 15.
Good story. We also covered the next story, right? Which is, I think maybe there's some filler issues, 1 or 2 filler issues in between. And then we get into the Man Without a Country story arc by Wade and Garney. And that begins in Captain America 450. And we see President Clinton in the Oval Office stripping Steve Rogers of his citizenship and his Captain America identity, because Cap can't prove, and until he does, he can't prove that he wasn't behind a leak of sensitive information for the Argus anti-aircraft cannon that was actually stolen by Machinesmith. And at the end of that story arc in issue 453, we see Cap save Clinton's life on the tarmac at Camp David from an assassination attempt by Machinesmith. And again, later at the end of that story, back in the Oval Office when Cap gets his shield back. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, that's a cool story too. Yeah, you're right. We did cover that in episodes 38 and 40. So we covered that whole story arc in those 2. And then, oh, by the way, in between episode 39, we snuck in an interview with Ron Garney, the artist. So you might want to check those out, episodes 38, 39, and 40. And I do recall it was a really cool scene where Clinton is on that tarmac and there's flames and everything, and he ends up saluting,
right. Yeah.
Cap. I think on the tarmac while the flames are all around. Yeah, it was really cool.
It's a good tale. It's a good tale. Yeah.
Is that it for
That's
Clinton?
it. That's it for Bill.
All right. Well, the next president is George W. Bush. W.
Yeah. George Walker Bush, right? Drop the Herbert. Sorry. Can't have the Herbert. You can just have the Walker. So George Walker Bush, our 43rd president, served from 2001 to 2009. I found 3 appearances that were notable with President G.W. Bush. The first one, I think most folks maybe don't recall, sort of below the radar, and that is Captain America 2001 Annual #1 from November 2001. And this is kind of a really interesting story, Rick. I don't know if you remember this one, but Cap is in the Oval Office to meet with President Bush, and Bush hands him a sealed top secret folder, and it's sealed, which is important, right? Because Bush tells Cap that he hasn't opened it. Nobody's opened and read this since it was put away in the files back in the 1940s, but he thinks it's probably important, and Cap needs to read it. So Cap begins to read the file, and it's a flashback story. It goes back to World War I, and basically he has a mission. And he's captured by Red Skull and Warrior Woman. And there is the presumption that he may be lost. And the generals and FDR are sitting around the Oval Office and they're talking about this. And they're like, what are we going to do? How are we going to, if they report, the Nazis say that they have killed Captain America, how are we going to deal with this, right? It could be a huge propaganda blow. And so in that moment, they decide that they're going to ignore it and they're going to pretend it didn't happen. And they're simply going to put someone else in Captain America's uniform because it's the symbol that is important. And so as Cap is reading this in Bush's office, he's getting agitated. He's a little upset, right? That
Mm-hmm.
they would not honor his death. And he says very specifically, FDR would never go along with this. I've met FDR and he just would not go along with this. Of course, we know FDR, did go along with this, right? Because Cap did die and he was replaced by the Spirit of 76. Of course, that was Truman. So maybe FDR would not have gone along with it. Of course, eventually Cap escapes. This plan was never put into place. But he asked the president, like, why are you giving me this folder to read? And Bush says, I owe you. And the reason I owe you is my dad was shot down over the Pacific Ocean on the exact day that you went missing. And because you were missing, there were US subs patrolling that area looking for you. And that's the only reason they found my dad. And so I'm here today because of you. And so I owe you. So it's a really great story. And it portrays, which isn't always the case in a couple other examples. It portrays the president in a very serious light, but also in a very sympathetic and compassionate light as well.
That's a cool retcon. That it is a cool retcon. You know, Bush they made it so that it went in the same place and area and everything that you know
Right.
Bush
Yeah.
went down. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. I
Yeah.
like
And it
that.
was, USS Finback was the submarine that fished George Herbert Walker Bush out of the water as a downed pilot. So, yeah, nicely tied together with real history. So we have a second time George W. Bush shows up in a Cap story, and that's in the Avengers, Volume 3, number 70 from October 2003. And in this one, Bush actually goes to the Avengers mansion, and he wants to thank the Avengers for defeating the Red Skull. At this time, you may recall, the Red Skull was deep, deep in disguise as the Secretary of Defense, Del Rusk, and using US bioweapons laboratories to develop a bioweapon that he unleashed in the United States, creating what was known as a red zone. And it was through the Avengers' efforts that he was defeated. And Cap was very pointed at the end of this story that, like, this should never happen again. The US should not be toying with these bioweapons. And he makes it very clear to the president that, like, he expects him to take care of the problem. So that's the second time that we see George W. Bush. But maybe the wackiest one is in issue 3 of The Ultimates from May 2002. You probably remember this one, Rick. We've talked about The Ultimates before, stories we haven't covered in the podcast yet. But here we see the president at a black tie gala discussing Cap's fighting potential with Colonel Nick Fury. That's the Samuel L. Jackson version of Samuel L. Fury, right? And when he meets him, that is when President Bush meets Cap, he asks him, well, what's your verdict on the 21st century, Captain America? Cool or uncool? And Cap says, as he pops off a salute, cool, Mr. President. Definitely cool. And there we have it. Our 3 apperances of George W.
That was
Bush.
your George W. Bush impersonation.
Well, halfway.
All right. After W,
Yeah.
we get Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Hussein Obama the second. Now he doesn't go by Junior. I go by Junior, Rick, and a lot of folks usually go by Junior if you're the second. But Barack goes by the number 2 because he's named after his dad. And of course, he was the 44th president, served 2 terms, 2009 to 2017, and he has made a number of appearances. So, shall we get into them?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, the one that jumps out in my mind, and I don't know, we should have asked Mark Waid. I don't think we asked Mark Waid. But you remember that Captain America Man Out of Time miniseries, right?
Yeah, we sure
written
do. Of
by
course we do.
Wade.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there is an issue. I think it's in issue 3 of that 2011 miniseries where we see, Steve Rogers in the Oval Office, and he really wants to go back in time using Reed Richards' time machine and go back to his era because he is feeling like a man out of time. And the president tells him that that's just not going to be possible. It's there's too much risk in upsetting the timeline. You can't go back and take the chance of changing the unfolding history. And we never actually see who the president is. He's either obscured in shadows or there's too much glare coming through the windows of the Oval Office. But by the body shape and sort of the head structure, I think this is President Obama. This certainly
Yeah,
takes
I
place
think we
during
all
his
can
term.
agree that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can agree to that. But again, we never see his face for sure. But we most definitely see his face in Captain America 611.
Oh,
So
by
in
the way,
that,
I just want to point out, Man at a Time, amazing miniseries. If people haven't read that, you need to do yourself a favor and read it. It's a Mark Wade does an excellent job with Steve Rogers as a character, and it's just a great story. It's you know you get to see like what was going through and talk about a retcon, right? Because this happened at Avengers 4. So you get to see, from Steve's perspective, some things that were happening with the Avengers at that time. And then, of course, his conversations with Tony and then his opportunities. And then eventually Steve makes the right choice. We actually do cover it panel by panel if people want to check out episode 31. So it's a fun story.
it is. It's definitely one of the better miniseries out there in terms of the art, but also the quality of the story. So we see Cap and Obama in Captain America 611 from December 2010, and in this issue we see Steve, but he's not Cap here. He's Commander Rogers, right? Because he's no longer wearing the Captain America uniform. Who's wearing it? Well, Bucky Barnes has been wearing it for a while, right? But Bucky's in trouble, right? Because now word is getting out about what he did when he was the Winter Soldier, and there's talk about putting him on trial. And we see Commander Rogers twice making the case to the president in two different parts of that issue that Bucky should not be held legally accountable for his crimes as the Winter Soldier. We see Steve and the president in the Situation Room, and then later he's making the case in the Oval Office as well. And we see that play out again later on in issue 619. This is after Barnes escapes from the Russian prison where he's being held. And Steve is with the president again. And President Obama, very clearly, President Obama makes the case that Bucky can never again pick up the mantle of Captain America. That is simply off the table. And we see them again in the Oval Office in the final issue, number 4 of the 4-part Siege miniseries from June 2010, following the fall of Norman Osborn in his Dark Avengers. And then one last time is in Avengers versus X-Men number 6. You might remember that one, Rick, from
Mm-hmm.
2012. We see Cap and Black Panther and the Iron Man in the Oval Office. And there's a lot of hubbub because we've got a Phoenix Force empowered X-Men team, 4 X-Men that have been imbued with the power of the Phoenix Force. And they're there to advise President Obama on how to basically diffuse conflict with the X-Men. And that's it. That's what we got for our Obama appearances.
Any others? Any other presidents that have had opportunity with Captain America?
Well, we don't see either Donald Trump or Joseph Biden. Maybe they're just too new. Maybe they just haven't made it into the comics yet. But unfortunately, we don't have appearances of any presidents since, I think, 2012. But I do want to mention an honorable mention, if I could, Rick. Have you ever read The Amazing Spider-Man President's Day special from February 2009?
President Days. Well, okay. So there was Amazing Spider-Man 583,
Mm-hmm.
which came out in 2009, and that's where Peter Parker, or not Peter Parker, that's where Spider-Man meets Obama. Is that the one you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Well, no, but that's a great story. But there was a digital comic that was produced by Marvel. It was written by Matt Fraction and penciled by Andy McDonald with colors by Nick Filardi. And there's a Cap story, and Cap is talking to Peter Parker. And he's telling him at one point when handling the cosmic cube, it basically transported him back to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on November 19th, 1863. And he's standing in the crowd right in front of Abraham Lincoln as the president reads his now famous address and declaration at the Soldiers' Cemetery, what we know is the Gettysburg Address. And so for that split second of him in the crowd, we get to see Steve Rogers, Captain America, and Abraham Lincoln in the same panel. So I count this as an honorable mention, but folks should definitely check out this. If you haven't seen that digital comic, it's got a great cover with Cap on one side, Peter Parker on the other is Spider-Man, and Abe Lincoln rolling up his sleeves, ready to get into some fisticuffs right between them. So it's a cool little story.
Definitely have to check that out. Bob, I gotta say, this was really cool. I'm so glad that you were able to kind of go through this and do some research. And wait a minute, did I just say Bob did research for the show?
Hey, the blind squirrel finds a nut every now and again, Rick.
But this was cool and very timely, very very timely. And so I enjoyed this. So thanks for bringing us through the history. That I mean, 90 years of Captain America comics, and we got to see 10 different times that Cap met the president. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Well, you know what's great, Rick? America, right? Because we have Democratic presidents, we have Republican presidents, but you know what's eternal? Captain America. And regardless of who's wearing that uniform, Steve Rogers, William Naslund, Jeff Mace, William Burnside, Sam Wilson. Oddly enough, I did not find any appearances of any presidents in any Sam Wilson story. So that's something to look out for. Hopefully, we'll see that in the future. But hey, yeah, presidents come and go, Cap remains.
Amen. And you know what else remains? Our show. We'll be back next. We'll be back next week, next episode, and as we promised before, we're covering the long tail story of Secret Empire. So we're going to be doing part 4, which covers Captain America 173, which came out in 1974, and we'll be covering that panel by panel. And as always, Bob, it's been a lot of fun wrapping Cap with you.
It has. Can't wait till next week.
And everybody, if you don't mind, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen. If you're on Facebook, please leave a comment. If you're on YouTube, please smash that like button, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe there as well. And as always, we thank you for listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.